Hey there, TikTok. Today is Tuesday, the 14th of July, 2026. Things are not good in the US right now. We have a lot of challenges that we're facing. They're doing extrajudicial killings in the street where people who are unarmed and who have committed no crimes are being assassinated without trial, without warrant, without cause. Of all of the people who are being taken into custody by ICE agents, they're not being deported. So while we see the Frozen Water Army doing roundups, they're rounding up people. While we see them rounding up people, those people then vanish. They're not being sent back to their countries of origin. They're not being sent to third-party countries. Nobody knows what's happening to the majority of detainees taken by the Frozen Water Army. Now, this is the part that's speculation, but based on historical facts. Historically speaking, when a country maintains concentration camps, they do the most horrific things to the people inside of those concentration camps. Now, in Arizona, the fire department of Mesa was refused entry to a detention center where they were concerned about the safety of the detainees. The detainees are being held at such high numbers inside of these facilities that it violates the fire code. It violates the fire code. So think about that for a second. In the name of public safety, these agents are taking people into custody who they then put into dangerous situations. You know, I touched on this the other day. If a superhero would come into your facility and liberate the people, then you have to question the righteousness of your actions. Now, I'm not claiming that firemen are some sort of moral heroes, but in broad terms, firemen are what we consider heroes in our society. They do the heroic work of putting their own lives into dangerous situations to help people who might be at risk. And in the current setting, what's currently happening in the US, firefighters are being turned away from these ICE facilities and being disallowed from inspecting them to make sure that they're safe. So the people who are modern day heroes are being prevented from bringing safety to the people inside of these facilities. In other words, the people running these facilities know that what they're doing is inhumane, cruel, and dangerous, and they do not want to allow people who are invested in the wellness of society to have a glimpse at what they're doing. That's why we see people having to fight in court to get access for health inspections. They want health inspections and sanitation inspections. They're not asking that everybody be set free arbitrarily. They're saying we want to inspect whether health and safety standards are being met. They want to make certain that the minimum standards for health and safety are being followed. But these facilities know they're acting outside of public safety. They're acting outside of what would be considered safe and legal. And so rather than admitting their wrongdoing and trying to fix the problem, they block the people who are responsible for the safety and wellness of others from seeing what they're doing. Rather than fix the problems that they know exist, they block the people who are trying to bring safety and wellness. Can you imagine that? Blocking health inspectors blocking fire inspectors. Again, health and fire workers are the equivalent to our modern day heroes. They're the people who put their own safety at risk to help other people who might be in danger. So when health inspectors and fire safety inspectors are turned away from these detention centers, it tells us in no uncertain terms that conditions inside of these centers are unhealthy and present a fire danger. See, the fire department, they have to maintain standards of safety. The fire department is tasked with making certain that buildings are not overcrowded. The fire marshal sets a limit on how many people you can have inside of a building. And in order for these facilities to operate, they violate fire safety code. They purposefully violate fire safety code. Even though they know the safety code is put in place for everyone's protection, they still go against the policies of the fire department and maintain unsafe conditions in these detention centers. And this is not speculation. Okay, this is borne out by the fact that health inspectors and fire inspectors are locked out of these facilities. There's even been court rulings saying that fire safety cannot be considered. So the Mesa Fire Department filed a lawsuit after they were denied entry to one of these ICE facilities, and the judge said, actually, Mesa Fire Department, you don't have jurisdiction over federal operations. Can you imagine that? The fire department trying to make certain that safety standards are met was determined not to have any authority over federal operations. So now what? We need a federal fire inspector to come to these facilities and inspect them to make sure that they are up to federal fire codes? I mean, it's just wild. It's wild. So they're feeding the people maggoty food. They're unaliving people inside of custody, inside of solitary confinement. There are pregnant children inside of these concentration camps. There's no such thing as a consensual child pregnancy. Every child pregnancy is a result of non-consensual intercourse. So the children inside of these concentration camps are being subject to intercourse that they cannot legally consent to. And yet we don't see any of the guards going to jail. So when we talk about the Epstein class controlling our government, what does that mean? It means that little kids inside of jail cells are subject to involuntary intercourse. It means that the babies, the products of rape, are then hidden. We have no idea what's happening to the babies of these detained children. So there are detained children who are having babies inside of U.S. concentration camps, and we have no idea what's happening to those babies. They're literally hiding babies. Babies who were born in concentration camps are being hidden. Now, if you look at history, this feed, this live stream is for educational purposes. Anything that I say here is hopefully going to benefit a future generation who might reflect on history and live a better future by understanding what happened in the past. So in the past, when concentration camps have been run, the people running the concentration camps did the most inhumane things to the people inside. They subject them to mass murder. They subject them to medical experimentation. They subject them to deportation or extradition or rendition. So all of these concentration camps, we have a pretty good idea what's going on inside of them based on what historically happens inside of concentration camps. Hey guys, I appreciate you being in the room. I didn't bring out my reading glasses today, so it's kind of hard for me to see who all's in here. But I appreciate you being here. If you have any comments, if you like sharing the video, I do appreciate any likes. I do have Linktree and all that stuff. I'm just talking a little bit about what happens inside of the concentration camps, right? Because we know there's no moral concentration camp. Every concentration camp is an immoral act. You can't operate a safe, family-friendly, dignified concentration camp. Every concentration camp is an act of inhumane disregard for life. They're terrible. Nobody should have to be inside of one. I don't care what kind of alleged crime you were supposedly participating in. You shouldn't be subject to a concentration camp regardless of whatever is alleged against you. And the fact of the matter is, they don't. Oops, I just got water on my screen. The fact of the matter is, they don't treat the people inside of those concentration camps with the most basic human rights that are accorded to them under the U.S. Constitution. So they're violating the constitutional rights of the detainees. They're violating their human rights, and they're certainly violating their most basic dignity that every human being is entitled to. You know, they're feeding them maggoty food. They're forcing them into, quote, voluntary deportation. And then once they sign the deportation papers, they continue to maintain custody of them to extract labor. Okay, because these concentration camps are actually labor camps too. Geo Group, one of the major corporations responsible for maintaining these concentration camps, extracts labor from the detainees for very little or no pay. In a lot of situations, there's no pay for the detainees at all. So they're forcing these people into concentration camps, forcing them to do labor and not paying them at all. Meanwhile, the commissary is so expensive and there's not even drinkable water. So if you want to have any water for drinking inside of one of these detention centers, you have to pay something like $8 for a 16-ounce bottle of water. So they're doing forced labor. They're doing exploitative practices for commissary. They're SAing children. They're forcing children to carry babies to term, and they're disappearing the babies. So things are bad in the U.S. right now. And I typically am not on here to candy coat things and talk gently to people and make them feel comfortable about what's happening in our country. Generally speaking, my purpose for this channel is to talk about how things are bad in our country right now, and specifically what is bad. And then maybe someone will address it. Maybe someone will say, you know what? He's right. Things are bad. We should make things better. Hey, thank you for that. It looks like somebody sent a heart me. Thank you. But the point that I'm making is this. We have concentration camps. The concentration camps are locking people like health inspectors and fire inspectors out. Fire inspectors and health inspectors, in essence, are the closest thing we have to superheroes in our modern age. So if you're locking superheroes out of the detention centers, it's because you know you're a criminal. You know what you're doing inside of those detention centers is a criminal act. If you're doing criminal acts inside of the detention centers and you have to lock the good guys out, maybe those detention centers shouldn't exist. Maybe you shouldn't keep a concentration camp if you have to lock doctors, firemen, lawyers, and family members outside. You know, there have been numerous homicides that have happened inside of these detention centers, and there aren't any prosecutions. Typically, if you or I do a homicide, somebody will come to our door, take us into custody, and throw us into a little metal box. But for these agents, not only do they do SA on children, they do homicides inside of these facilities, and there are no charges. There are no charges. There are no charges. So while they're charging people for a civil violation, a lot of times people who are innocent, they're taking people based on suspicion and forcing them into concentration camps, and a lot of times they're American citizens, they're USA citizens. So I get wound up about this, you know. I get wound up about it. Maybe you didn't know this about me, but the DHSI came for me. I already have been come for once. They came for me. They ambushed me outside of my place. They threw me inside of one of those metal boxes. They tried to construe me as being a Canadian. They said, "Oh, you're this guy, something." I can't even remember the guy's name now. They're like, "We got you," and I'm like, "I have no idea who that person is." They tried to say I was a Canadian. They ambushed me. They were all set to try and deport me, but they figured out who I was. This is under Trump 1.0. So 6 years ago, they personally came for me. They personally came for me. They already took me once. So, you know, when I leave the house, I look around. When I leave the driveway, I look around. I watch for unmarked vehicles. I watch for individuals who might be paying extra attention to me because I am a targeted individual. They already took me once. And after they took me, they brought up my record from Standing Rock. Okay? At Standing Rock, I took a plea deal which said that my record would never be used against me. And they used my record against me. But I guess that's only for Morton County, right? Morton County agrees not to use my record against me and never bring it up again. But the federal government, they didn't make that agreement. So yeah, I've been arrested a couple times in my life. One time was at Standing Rock. They claimed I was trespassing, but I was on the Cannonball River. They claimed I was trespassing, but I hadn't crossed any fences. They claimed I was trespassing, but I hadn't been given the opportunity to leave the area where I was trespassing. So that whole case was baloney. But at the time, there had been a survey done on potential jurors, and upwards of 70% of potential jurors said they were predisposed to finding water protectors guilty. And if you look at the water protectors who took their cases to trial, that ended up being actually a lower number because the vast majority of water protectors who went to trial ended up with guilty verdicts. And again, the water protectors were only out there doing peaceful, nonviolent, prayerful activity that was strictly legal. We weren't engaged in any illegal activity or anything that falls outside of the First Amendment. We have a right to peaceful, legal protest. We have a right to religious freedom. But when you assert those rights, the federal government tries to construe it as a criminal act. And like I said, they came for me once already. They already came for me once. I've been inside of one of those detention centers. Well, I've been inside of the federal courthouse. And when they put you into the cell in the federal courthouse, people have carved their names into the metal bench to try and get attention so that someone in their family will potentially be told that they were taken. Because when the federal government takes you, you don't get a phone call. You don't get to talk to a lawyer. You don't get to talk to your family. You have to sit inside of that cell until a lawyer asks to talk to you. I was fortunate when my name showed up on the docket, a federal public defender saw my name and took interest in my case. If that hadn't happened, I might have ended up deported to Canada as an American. Because I didn't have a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer. The only reason I was able to get a good public defender is because one saw my name and decided to help me. So, I've been targeted by these guys. They ran at me with guns drawn. Fortunately, when I went to driver's ed, I went to driver's ed in Texas. I grew up in Texas. And my driver's ed instructor told me in no uncertain terms, if you ever get pulled over, put your hands on the ceiling. Either put your hands on the ceiling or keep them on the steering wheel. Don't give them any reason to think you might be reaching for a weapon. So as soon as I was pulled over by the feds, I immediately put my hands on the ceiling because I didn't want them to ever be able to say that I reached for anything. And even when they came up to the car and were pointing weapons at me, I kept my hands on the ceiling until I was able to tell them the car is still in gear. If I take my foot off the brake, it's going to pull away. Is it okay if I take the car out of drive and put it into park so it doesn't roll forward? And fortunately for me, they were willing to let me do that. A lot of the guys who are being unalived right now, they are being murdered because their vehicle moved forward. If my vehicle had moved forward in that moment, they very easily could have taken shots at me. They already had their weapons drawn on me. So, I've been on the receiving end of DHSI investigations. They actually stole my phone that day. They did not have a warrant for my phone. They took my phone and were stupid enough not to turn it off or to disable the GPS. And when they took my phone, they brought it to their own home. They brought my phone to their own personal home. And the GPS tracker from Google Maps told me exactly where my phone went. So on the night of my arrest in July of 2020, the feds took my phone to their home in Lake Oswego. And who knows what they did with my phone at their home. They shouldn't have even had my phone in the first place. And it took months for my lawyer to get my phone back. Meanwhile, I literally had done nothing wrong. They didn't have a single charge that stuck. They had to drop their case against me because their entire case was make-believe. They didn't have any real evidence or any kind of case. They just wanted to get me under pretrial terms, okay? This is what happens in a lot of situations. The government cannot effectively stop you from asserting your free speech. So rather than try and stop you from having free speech, they just arrest you, put a bunch of make-believe charges on you in order to get you to agree to pretrial release terms. They put all of these pretrial release terms onto activists to stifle their free speech. So if they arrest you before trial, before you even get a chance to assert your rights in front of a judge, they can hold you without bail or without bond and keep you in jail. Or you can agree to pretrial release terms, and by agreeing to pretrial release terms, they let you out. But for instance, in my case, those terms included not going near the federal courthouse. So they specifically they also made terms where I couldn't use the internet. I was disallowed from using the internet. I should find that charging paper and my pretrial release terms, because they prevented me from using social media. I was disallowed from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, MySpace, any social media site. In order to get my pretrial release, they forced me to agree not to use the internet. They said, you cannot use the internet. But I'm a gig worker. So I was like, hey, I need to use the internet. That's how I make my living. So fortunately, the judge made allowances so I could go near the courthouse if it was for a delivery. And I could use the internet if it was for my job. But What's happening right now, a bunch of activists inside of our country are under pretrial release terms. They've had their freedoms limited because they were arrested, not necessarily guilty, simply charged. And once they're charged, they have to accept pretrial release terms. This is a tactic that really nobody's talking about, but it's ongoing. It's one of the strongest weapons in their toolbox is pretrial release terms. If you're an activist watching this right now, you probably have had pretrial release terms if you've been arrested. And they don't have to make those release terms fair. They can be totally unfair. And actually, all it would have taken is one corrupt cop to come along and lie and say I had violated those terms, and I would have gone to jail for breaking the terms of my release. So while I was on those pretrial release terms, for the most part, I just hid out. I didn't want to go in public. I didn't want to go to any place where I might be given a ticket for jaywalking or making an illegal turn or failure to yield or anything. They could have just said anything, and whatever it was would have been enough to make me get a violation of my terms of release and be subject to incarceration. Again, without any guilty finding, without any trial, simply based on the terms of my release and what I agreed to with the judge. So in our country right now, currently, a bunch of activists, people who are dedicated to the safety and wellness of our society, are under pretrial release terms. And a bunch of them are being stopped from going to places where they can have interactions with their community and do the vital work that absolutely needs to be done. And the way that they're being prevented is judges getting them to agree to pretrial release terms. So, and they had me under a gag order. So I couldn't even talk about the fact that I was not being allowed to go on the internet. I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't talk about any of it. Meanwhile, I hadn't actually done anything wrong. Like, I hadn't violated any laws. I hadn't even violated terms of service agreements. They're trying to get me on. They're trying to get me on releasing the personal information of a federal agent. Is what they're trying to get me on. They were also trying to get me on illegal entry, and I never even have been to Canada. They were alleging that I was a full Canadian. They're trying to get me on releasing the personal information of a federal officer. So there's what they were trying to charge me with are very specific crimes. And in order to prove those crimes, I would have had to have done the acts, but I never did any of those acts. So they ended up having to drop their case against me. The judge let them drop it without prejudice. So in theory, they could bring those charges again and retry me for the same thing. But they don't have any evidence because I never did any of the stuff that they said I did. And that's what's happening right now in our country to a bunch of activists. Because again, this happened to me 6 years ago. 6 years ago, under Trump 1.0 is when they came for me. But now they have this system locked in. They have it established. It's a standard operating procedure now. So wherever you're from, there's probably people in your community who have been arrested by the feds who are only out right now because they agreed to shut up and stay away from protests. The only reason a lot of these arrests are made is to get people on pretrial terms, because they know once they get you on pretrial terms, you're not going to disobey. You're not going to violate the terms of your release because you don't want to take the chance of having to face even more time and worse charges. So, a tripod here, but it's kind of kind of a jerry-rigged tripod. There we go. But yeah, you know, the U.S. is not okay right now. We're in a bad way. A big part of what's wrong with our country is to do with lawyers and judges. It's not just the federal agents themselves, because it takes a larger institutional mechanism to make all of those things work. In order for them to be able to carry out their raids, in order for them to be able to carry out the secret police, in order for them to maintain the concentration camps, they need all of these institutions in lockstep behind them. And that's why we see situations like what happened with Susan Collins, where Susan Collins made certain that ICE could get 70 billion without any oversight. So they don't have any accountability for their behaviors. They don't have any accountability for their criminal activities. And meanwhile, they're given this huge pile of money to carry out extrajudicial killings. Extrajudicial killings. Yes, that is what I'm saying. Thomas, what I'm saying is they're taking away people's right to protest. And the way that they do it is by initially arresting them. So once you have the initial arrest, even if it was an unlawful arrest, you can get the person to agree to pretrial terms. And then if they violate those terms, you can arrest them based on that, and it will be a legal arrest. So you can do an illegal arrest, put people on pretrial conditions, and then use that as a justification for doing a legal arrest. And, you know, this is what happened to me 6 years ago. So at that time, you know, it was already happening. It was happening then 6 years ago. But now it's just much more entrenched. It's more established. It's more everyday. And, you know, we just don't hear about it. We just don't hear about it, right? The media turns a blind eye to court proceedings of activists. Activists are railroaded in the courts regularly, and the courts are considered just, right? They're like, oh, well, it was a legal hearing. It was a legal process. The activist shouldn't have been doing that. They faced trial, and the judge found that they shouldn't have been doing that. Meanwhile, the judge is some Klansman who is like pardoning rapists and murderers. But if you're using free speech, then the judge comes for you like you're some sort of a Klansman. They go after activists like they're some sort of terrorists when all they're doing is using their free speech. So when they came for me, they used my Twitter against me. They looked at my Twitter and they said, you know what? His Twitter is justification enough. We can use his Twitter to get a warrant. But they didn't get the warrant ahead of time. They arrested me first and then asked a judge for a warrant. So they lie to judges. They lie to judges to get the warrants. So, like right now, they're doing this whole thing with administrative warrants, right? Because ICE doesn't have anything beyond administrative authority. They're an administrative branch of government. So all of their activities are done under the guise of administering immigration law. But they are not immigration lawyers. They are not immigration judges. They are not immigration courts. They're simply the people responsible for delivering immigration notifications. They're not supposed to be taking people into custody. They don't have that statutory authority. So, in essence, they're a rogue agency, okay? Because what they're doing goes outside of their legal purview. They're acting outside of their authority. But we don't see judges trying to hold them accountable, because judges work hand in glove with prosecutors and law enforcement. So even when law enforcement are violating the rights of the citizens, the judges have to see those law enforcement every day. They have to see those lawyers every day. So they don't want to alienate the people who they have a working relationship with. So rather than making the people accountable who are doing actual human rights violations, the judges turn a blind eye. What those agents did to me was a criminal act. They violated my rights of free speech. But I couldn't find any lawyers to take my case. They wouldn't even consider my case. I went to the ACLU, I went to Amnesty International, I went to Oregon, trying to remember the name of the Oregon group. I went to all these different lawyers groups and was like, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. They arrested me. Do I have any recourse for my rights being violated because what they alleged I did, I never did. And what I did do wasn't a crime, but they arrested me anyway. And none of the lawyers would even consider my case. They wouldn't even consider it. The one group that considered it, they said, we could take your case, but we're afraid that we would lose it because it's against the federal government. No one wants to put a case against the federal government. Things were different 6 years ago. There's a lot of cases being brought against the federal government now. But at the time, there was no representation for me. So I had my rights violated. I didn't have any recourse. And, this, this is all 6 years ago. Things are much worse now. The people who are living through it now, it's much worse. The food that I had when I was in federal detention was inedible, but it was at least not maggoty. The food they're being given now is so rotten, so spoiled, that it's become maggoty. They're feeding maggoty food to detainees now. They're giving them water that's, you can't even drink it. It will make you sick if you drink the water. So, what I went through, as much as I like to pretend like it was terrible, it was nothing compared to what people are living through now. I was only in detention for 16 or 18 hours. And a lot of these people are being held for months based on lies. They didn't even do anything wrong. They're being held for months. They're not even foreigners. They're actual U.S. citizens who are still getting swept up under Kavanaugh. Because here's the thing. The Supreme Court made a ruling under Justice Kavanaugh saying that it's okay to ethnically profile people. It's okay to racially profile people. For immigration agents, it's okay for them to profile you. If they sorry, there's a comment here. Federal government will pay your filing fees at the federal courthouse. Interesting. Look up case law situations such as yours. Pro se, represent yourself. Oh, interesting. I'm not sure that's good information, real Joe Hutchison. I don't feel like I would be a good representation for myself. I believe there's a saying that says the client, the person who agrees to represent themselves has an idiot as a client. I can't remember if that's the exact saying, but it's something like that. Basically, I know that I don't know federal law, and because I know that I don't know it, I rather rely on someone who does. I know that I don't know the processes and procedures for federal court, and so instead of putting myself in a situation where that could be a vulnerability that's exploited against me, I rather have the assistance of someone who is a professional at that. So you'll never find me doing a pro se case because I am not so stupid to think that I'm not stupid. I'm not so dumb as to pretend that I am not dumb. I am dumb. I am stupid. I rather let people who are smart do that work for me because I know I'm incapable of it. So, with that said, there's a very small number of public defense federal public defenders. There aren't enough public defenders. There aren't enough federal attorneys to represent the cases that are currently being pushed through right now. So even if all of the detainees inside of these detention centers had the means to hire an attorney, there wouldn't be enough attorneys in our country to represent all the people who are being forced through this process right now. All of the number of people inside of these detention centers is so high that there's not enough lawyers to represent them. So, sorry, I'm not taking on any co-hosts right now. I might do that some other time. Go online, look up your case laws pertaining to what happened to you, and those are what you say in court. Well, probably what you're saying is true. I'm not doubting what you're saying at all. What I'm saying is that under the advice of my lawyer who volunteered to help me, she was saying, look, you could try and bring a case against them. But the thing is, if you bring a case against them, they're going to go digging for anything they can find on you. They're going to look for your tax filings. They're going to look for your voter registration. They'll look at your vehicle registration. They'll look at your pet registration. They'll look at anything they can possibly look at to try and find a violation that they can try you under. So bear in mind, at that point, they had already fabricated one case against me. So at that point, I was already facing a case that was 100% make-believe. And at that point, I knew that they were willing to just make stuff up to try and get me. So I wasn't super eager to put myself in a compromising position. I was already compromised. So, when you've already been inside of their jail cells, it makes you look at things a little bit differently. Real Joe Hutchison, I don't know if you've ever been in federal detention, but it is not great. It's terrible. It's just like a metal bench and a cement floor and a stainless steel toilet. And the room is about the size of, like an efficiency apartment. It's just like, I don't know, the size of 2 sheets of plywood or something. It's a small space. And it was really wild, right? When they take you into custody, they have to establish who you are. So I already surrendered my ID to them. They had my phone. They had a pretty good idea of who I was. But as part of establishing who I was, they took my thumbprint. And they put my thumb on their little thumbprint scanner. They have like this Bluetooth box where they thumbprint you, and then it tells, I don't know, like whatever database, who you are. And so they were trying to establish that I was a Canadian, but when they did my thumbprint scan, it came back of who I actually am. So the detention officers, the people who were responsible for booking me in, could already tell from the outset that their case was wrong, because they're trying to say that I was this, I can't even remember the guy's name, something Roland. And as soon as they put my thumbprint scanner on, it came back with my name and my identity. I could just see the guys get deflated. I could just see them get deflated by the fact that they knew who I was, and I wasn't the person they were trying to claim who I was. They were trying to claim I was a Canadian person so they could send me on a deportation flight. But once they thumbprinted me, they established that I am myself. So they knew that their case was trash as soon as they brought me in. Probably before they brought me in. That's why they didn't get a warrant until afterwards. That's, again, this is what we face in the U.S. And this is years ago. But they will arrest you. They'll come to your house, ambush you, arrest you without a warrant, and then try and get a judge afterwards to issue a warrant. And the judge was willing to. The judge gave them a warrant in hindsight or retroactive. And, you know, they lied. They had to lie to that judge to get him to give them a warrant because they didn't have a case against me. Their entire case was just lies, and the whole point was to get me gagged under pretrial conditions. So, you know, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And again, I didn't do anything wrong. It's not like I was out there shooting people or pew-pewing people or kind of like I wasn't doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? Like I go out of my way to obey the laws preemptively because I know that they already want me. I already know that they want me. So I try at every turn to keep my nose clean, keep my fingernails clean, and not have any kind of reason for them to be able to make a false claim against me. So I already knew that what I was doing was legal because I had very purposefully been maintaining water protector protocol, peaceful, legal, prayerful. If you're peaceful, legal, and prayerful, anything they bring against you is probably going to fall off because you have a right to freedom of speech. You have a right to freedom of religion, and you have a right to freedom of assembly. If what you're doing is peaceful, legal, and prayerful, you shouldn't have any reason to fear going to jail. So I knew that what I was doing was not outside of the law. And as a result of that, I was relatively confident they wouldn't be able to get their case through the courts. And in fact, the day before trial, they dropped all their charges. But they had already ambushed me at that point. They had already run at me with guns drawn. They had already thrown me into detention and, you know, stripped me of my rights. So even though none of their charges stuck, they had already taken my phone. They had already data mined my phone. They had already done all of the things that they do to you, stripping you naked, making you bend over and cough. You know, they already put me through the ringer, even though I wasn't doing anything wrong. Oh, they came for you, huh? Yeah, yeah. I mean, retaliation is a thing. They definitely, if you're doing something they don't like, they will come for you. So, you know, it's a weird time in the country right now. It's a very strange time to be alive in the US because a lot of the things that we were told are examples of liberty, examples of freedom, examples of justice are no longer available. The things that we were brought up to believe are hallmarks of our country are no longer hallmarks of our country. Due process, the rule of law, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all that's in the rearview mirror. And I don't, I don't understand how people can be patriotic towards the country. I don't understand how people can be patriotic towards it. Like Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man, take your pick, Green Lantern, uh, the Punisher, take any superhero. If you brought a superhero to the concentration camps that the US maintains, they would try and liberate those people. Right now, the far right in the United States has become so evil that they could not find an ally in a superhero. They're currently against Superwoman. They came out with Superwoman, the far right hated it. They came out with Superman, the far right hated it. Why does the far right hate superheroes now? You know why? It's because the far right knows that they're the villains. The far right knows that they're the villains, okay? They know that they're the villains. And if there's one thing that I could encourage you guys to do, I encourage you to tell them that. Tell them you're the villains. You are the villains. The far right, you are the villains. You're doing the things that supervillains do. You're doing the things that supervillains do. Your behaviors are so bad that superheroes would fight you. If Superman was real, Superman would go and fight against ICE agents. If Batman was real, Batman would go fight against ICE agents. The far right has become so villainous, so inhumane, so horrific that they have to hate superheroes now. They have to hate superheroes because superheroes would fight them. Superheroes would fight them. All that stuff about baseball, the Marines, and apple pie, that's in the rear view mirror now. All that stuff about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's in the rear view mirror. And it's because of us, okay? It's because of us. It's because of you and I. We're too busy out here watering our fields to do the essential things that are necessary to stand against nationalism and terror. There are terrorists running our country. They're doing ethnic cleansing. They're doing extrajudicial killings. Obviously there's graft. The chief financial officer of our country has made over $1 billion just in 1 year, more money than he made in his entire life. So there's corruption at the highest levels. The guy is legally liable for SAing a woman and then going and besmirching her and trying to tear down her character. So it wasn't enough for him to SA a woman. He then went on an attack spree trying to tear her down and drag her name through the mud, even though she was victimized by him. So the president of our country SA'd a woman and then character assassinated her. That's who these people are looking up to. So when I say that the US far right are supervillains, they are supervillains. They SA'd a woman and then character assassinated her. That's not what the good guys do. The good guys don't keep concentration camps. The good guys try and close concentration camps. Even in the US history, even in our own history, if there's a concentration camp, typically the US would be against it. In broad historical terms, if there's a concentration camp, we come out against it. We say you should not be holding people in indefinite detention. You should not be holding people in inhumane conditions. You should not be taking political prisoners. You should not be doing reprisal and persecution of political opponents, because those things don't contribute to liberty. Those things don't contribute to freedom. Those things don't contribute to a better world. When you attack political opponents using the apparatus of the state, that is authoritarianism. So we have authoritarian government in the US right now. The media won't call it that, but if you know what authoritarian government is, you can look at it and say, this is what authoritarian government is, and then compare that to what the US is and make your own decision. I'm not here to tell you what to think, but look at the facts and figure it out for yourself. Look at the facts. Do we have concentration camps? Yes. Are concentration camps considered moral? No. Do we have children held in concentration camps? Yes. Is maintaining concentration camps for children moral? No. Are children being forced into pregnancies? Yes. Is it moral to force a child to become pregnant? No. So we can easily look at the facts and through our own discretion make the judgments simply to determine that what's happening is immoral and wrong. There's no moral concentration camp. There is no ethical concentration camp. Every concentration camp is immoral and unethical. Specifically, if you're essaying children inside. They're essaying children, forcing them into pregnancy inside of concentration camps. How is that moral? How is that legal? Where are the prosecutions of the men who are essaying children? There are men in positions of authority inside of concentration camps essaying children. So again, Captain America, Superman, Batman, whichever superhero, take your pick. There's no superhero that would stand by while children are being essayed in concentration camps. So the US is officially taking policy that would cause a superhero to stand up against them. The US is officially taking immoral policy positions that are so bad it would force Batman or Superman or Captain America to fight them. Superheroes, if they existed, would be forced to fight against the USA today because of how horrific and violent, terrible, and immoral they're treating people. And again, there's no ethical concentration camp. There's no concentration camp which is moral, ethical, and just. Every concentration camp is an immoral act and has nothing to do with freedom. You can't say that you love freedom and maintain a concentration camp. If you maintain a concentration camp, you are against freedom. There's no moral concentration camps. They're all immoral. They should not exist. The only reason they exist is because the people who run them made massive contributions to the candidacy of DJT. So under 47, Geo Group and CoreCivic, the two biggest private prison corporations, basically bought Donald Trump. If you look at the political contributions that were made by CoreCivic and Geo Group, you can see that they paid Donald Trump to be their little puppet. They bought and paid for the US president just like he bought and paid for any of his mistresses or wives. They're so used to transactional relationships that now the presidency is bought and paid for the same way that little kids are bought and paid for at Epstein Island. The same way that little kids are bought and paid for, our administration is bought and paid for. In my opinion, they may as well be prostitutes. They may as well be sex workers at this point. You know, they may as well be Lindsey Graham's special friend because they're not ethical. They're actually, sex workers are more ethical. Sex workers are more moral. They have better ethics, morals, and principles than politicians. Politicians maintain concentration camps. There's no sex worker who would maintain a concentration camp. Like, I feel stupid for even comparing them because, again, the types of people who make those decisions, they're horrible people. They're horrible people. There's no moral concentration camp. Every politician who voted for a concentration camp is immoral. Every politician who voted to fund concentration camps should be accountable for what happens inside of those concentration camps. If you put your name on the funding for a concentration camp, you should be accountable for it. If you put your name onto the funding for a concentration camp, you should be accountable for it. What happened in Susan Collins' office, that should happen to every politician who voted to fund concentration camps. You shouldn't feel fine and safe and like you did the right thing if you voted for funding concentration camps. The AI summary says, a speech arguing the U.S. is becoming a supervillain due to politics. Good work, AI. You figured it out. That's my new argument. The U.S. is becoming a supervillain. The policies of the United States government are so far removed from ethical, moral, or just that the United States has become a supervillain. There is no superhero in the world that would allow the behaviors that the U.S. government is engaging in. The behavior of the federal government inside of the U.S. is so immoral, so corrupt, and violent that any superhero would have to fight against it. There's no superhero that would consider themselves a hero if they didn't stand up against what's happening right now in the U.S. And again, we see real world examples of this. So I'm using the example of Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or Captain America, but the reality is doctors, EMTs, firefighters, like the real life people who are heroes in our world, are trying to get access to the detainees and are being locked out. So the people who are actually responsible for heroic acts, like a firefighter is, they're being locked out of the detention centers. So even though they're responsible for safety, health, and wellness, they're being locked out. Now you have to ask, why would they lock people out who are responsible for safety, health, and wellness? Why would they lock people out who are responsible for safety? It's because they're unsafe. It's because they're unwell. If they're not letting doctors in to do health inspections, it's because it's unhealthy. The reason, oops, I got Puzzle Beast. The reason that they're not letting people do fire inspections is because they're breaking fire code. The reason they're not letting people do health inspections is because they're breaking health code. They're doing things that are criminal acts that make people unhealthy and unsafe, and are getting away with it because they won't even let people in to look at what they're doing. Now we have judges saying you have to let health inspectors in. But what they'll do is they'll have like a week-long cleanup where they force the detainees to do the labor. And then once the place is clean enough and safe enough to let the inspectors in, once they covered up their malfeasance, then they let the inspectors in. And again, this isn't speculation on my part. You can easily look this up. They're supposed to be allowing elected officials in to do inspections without notification ahead of time. Politicians are supposed to be allowed, I can't remember the phrase that they use, but there's a phrase for it where they do a surprise inspection. Politicians are allowed to do unannounced surprise inspections of these facilities, but the agents are not allowing them. And the reason that they're not allowing them is because they know what's going on inside of those facilities violates the policy. They know that what they're doing is a crime. So instead of letting the people in who are responsible to make sure that those crimes don't happen, they just lock those people out. Then they can say there never was a crime. Nobody saw a crime happen. There were 0 reports of a crime happening. You guys are just making all of that up. It's the whole Orwellian thing of he who controls the past controls the present, right? They have memory holes where they're throwing away the memory of the modern day. They're burying the truth of what's happening. And It's it's terrifying. It's terrifying because they could do that to anyone. They could do it to you or me. They could do it to anyone. If you're safe right now, don't assume that you'll be safe in the future, because the way this works is it's incremental. First, they go after people who are farm workers or migrants, and then they go after construction workers, and then they go after food service employees, and then they go after healthcare providers, and then they go after trans people, and then they go after the homeless, and then they go after students and professors, and then they go after doctors and lawyers. And before too long, they've taken everyone who isn't you. That's how it works. And as long as we keep standing aside and letting it happen, it's going to continue spiraling and getting worse and worse. And it's, you know, I'm a little bit wound up right now. Admittedly, I'm a little bit wound up. And part of the content that I make on this channel or any of my social media is to do with righteous outrage, justified anger, and the need to draw attention to the wrongdoings of our own country. Our own country is doing things wrong, and we are not an exception. We're not better than the rest. We're not, you know, we have lesser education, we have lesser health care, we have lesser access to information. You know, we're not as well fed. We don't have as good of like, our society is behind. Okay, guys, we're behind. The whole America First thing is a lie for soft-minded people. America is not first. We're behind in education. We're behind in healthcare. We're behind in courts and proceedings. We have the most people in jail of any country. So we are not a bastion of freedom, education, and health. We are not first. You know, we're not. And we could be. We actually could be. But the thing is that at this point, the cruelty is the whole point of the thing. They're doing all of this stuff intentionally to be cruel. They're specifically doing this stuff to be cruel because there are actually humane alternatives to every one of these policies that they're doing violently. Every one of these policies that they're doing in a criminal way violently, they could be doing it in a legal way peacefully. They could be doing all of these things in a way that respects human dignity, that respects civil liberties, that respects due process, that respects the rule of law. They're very purposefully deciding not to respect the rule of law. They're very purposefully deciding not to respect human dignity. And we need to act as though it's the case that we live in an authoritarian state. We do. We live in an authoritarian state. They're doing things that no civilized country does. Only fascists, authoritarians, and dictators do these types of behaviors. There's no ethical or moral concentration camp. Every concentration camp is a criminal, immoral act. It's not justifiable. And, you know, just because the Supreme Court says that it's good, we can't just take their word for it anymore. The Supreme Court has shown themselves to be a poor arbiter of righteousness. The Supreme Court in our country has shown themselves to be evildoers. They are evildoers. They're the people who superheroes would fight against. You know, they're doing things to humanity that no superhero would condone or accept. That's kind of, pardon me, I just have to itch my nose. It's kind of that's my new refrain, right? This is my new talking point. Batman, Superman, Captain America, Spider-Man, all of those people, or Superwoman, or Spider-Woman, or She-Hulk, all of those people would have to stand up against what the federal government is doing right now, because what they're doing is criminal. It's immoral, it's reprehensible, and they should be tried for it. They should be tried for it. I'm genuinely surprised that there's no action at the United Nations or the International Criminal Court. And actually, now that I think about it, Mexico's president just brought a case. So we're starting to see some of that happen now, where legal cases are being brought against our country because of the behaviors of our federal government. Our federal government has gotten to the point now where other countries are filing civil cases against us because of our inability to respect human rights. Now, they're doing it over the murders because there have been so many people, something like 17 Mexicans have been murdered by this administration. But they should be doing it about the SA, because there are endless SAs happening. There's just a case out of the Tacoma Detention Center where a veteran, a U.S. Army veteran, was SA'd while in custody. And, you know, they're SAing children. They have child concentration camps with pregnant children. There's no consensual child pregnancy. There's no consensual child pregnancy. Every child pregnancy is a result of a criminal act. There's no prosecution of the men responsible for SAing little girls. They're little girls in concentration camps who are being SA'd and forced to carry the babies to term. So yeah, the US, if there were superheroes in this world, they would come after the US, because the US is doing things that would make a superhero have to fight against us. The US is doing things that are so terrible that it would force superheroes to intervene on our behalf. If the US was watching from the outside what the US is doing, the US would send the Marines in. If any other country were doing this, the US would try and intervene and say, we have to change, we need a change of leadership. We need a regime change because the authoritarian regime is violating the rights of their people. That's what we say when another country does it. But when we do it, then for whatever reason, there's no pushback. There's no pushback. There's very little pushback. For whatever reason, we have become a country that allows, accepts, and fosters the types of behaviors that supervillains do. Supervillains, okay? What Jeffrey Epstein did, that's what supervillains do. And now it's happening to little girls in state custody. Our tax dollars as US citizens are being used to SA little girls in custody. And there's no way that that's ever moral, ethical, or legal. There's no way that that's ever ethical, moral, or legal. You cannot SA a little girl inside of a prison and pretend like you're the good guy. If you're SAing little girls inside a prison, you're the worst human on earth. And you know what? There's no prosecution of it. There's no cases pending against the people who are SAing little girls in prison. There's no cases pending against the people who are SAing little girls in prison. It baffles me, right? Because I was brought up in the 70s and the 80s, and you know, I was kind of taught all this G.I. Joe stuff about like Yo Joe and like America, you know, like we were taught to believe like
the red, white, and blue and the bald eagle and all of these patriotic themes that were absolute lies at the time, and they're still lies now. At that time, I didn't know about what was happening in Guatemala. At that time, I didn't know what was happening in Iraq or Iran. At that time, I didn't know what was happening in Nicaragua. At that time, I didn't know what was happening in the Philippines. But now I'm learning about like all of these genocides, all of these prison camps, all of these massacres that have been ongoing throughout my entire life. I'm 50 years old. In the 50 years that I have been alive, there have always been extrajudicial killings in the US. In the 50 years that I've been alive, there have always been manufactured cases based on lies in the US. You know, what they did to Stokely Carmichael, what they did to any of the Black Panthers, any of Angela Davis, any of the Black Panthers. You know, here's a perfect example. The Black Panthers organized a group of nonviolent actions in order to feed children and provide medicine to people who were being lynched. The Black Panthers were created as a mechanism to stop lynchings and feed people. And they were treated like terrorists for trying to stop lynchings. And if you're following along with current affairs like I am, then you know that there are lynchings now. They're finding people strung up in trees. We're back to the seasons of strange fruits again in the US. We're back to the season of strange fruits in the US. Now, there's a song called Strange Fruit, and it was written during the time of lynchings, and it talks about how people are being hung. And trigger warning, that song will mess you up once you understand what it's about. But we're at that time. We're at that time. And, you know, even though that song was written like, whatever, 70 or 80 years ago, we haven't progressed. We haven't moved past that point in history. We're still that country that does those horrific acts to people. You know, there are all of these, in my opinion, children that they're less than 30 years old, they're still figuring things out, that are now being unalived, and the circumstances are highly suspicious, but the medical examiner will rule it a suicide. They'll rule it self-harm. But here's the thing, though. It only takes one corrupt medical examiner to cover up a murder. It only takes one corrupt medical examiner to say, I believe this was a case of self-harm. And if the medical examiner says it, that becomes the legal truth. And it was done previously. This isn't a new playbook. This is all established procedures that are used to cover up murders. And just, again, in case you didn't know, the military here in the US goes to Is Not Real to train soldiers. The soldiers inside of our country do cross-training with the occupational forces in the Middle East. The forces who are responsible for doing G-Side, our soldiers train with them. Not just our soldiers, but our police too. So you have to ask, if your police and your soldiers are training with a military force engaged in G-Side, what are they training to do? What are the soldiers and police of the USA training to do when they train inside of an active G-Side? If you go to a country that's carrying out a G-Side for training, what are you training to do? You're not training for peacekeeping, I'll tell you that much. You're not training for delivery of aid. You're not training for restoring civility and democracy. If you go to a country that's perpetrating G-side for training, you're probably training to do a G-side yourself. So in my opinion, the reason the US sends soldiers and police to train in the occupied Palestinian territory is because they intend to do a G-side themselves. They intend to do a G-side themselves, and that's why they're training with people who are doing a G-side. What other reason would you have to train with a force doing a G-side other than doing a G-side yourself? What other possible reason is there? What possible reason could there be to train with a military force doing a G-side? What other reason besides doing a G-side yourself? So again, I come back to this. The US is doing immoral acts. We're behaving in such a terrible way, in such a horrific way, that if there were such a thing as superheroes, they would have to fight against us. If there were superheroes in the world, they would have to stand against what the United States is currently doing. And we do have the equivalent to modern day superheroes in the fire department, and they're being blocked from doing their job. So the fire department has a responsibility for safety. They have a responsibility to make sure that buildings are maintained in a way that's in accordance with fire safety, because it's their job to make sure people don't get burned up. And in the US, modern day heroes, real life heroes, firefighters, are being denied access to the detention centers because they know that they're unsafe. They know that what's happening, the agencies, the administrators, know that what's happening inside of their detention centers is a criminal act and goes against fire code. So the real life superheroes, the firemen, who are trying to keep people safe, are being locked out of these facilities because the administrators of the concentration camps know that they're violating fire code. And fire code, you know, it's just put in place for safety. It's only in place for safety. The only reason we have fire code in place is to protect human life. It's not partisan, it's not racist, it's not, you know, built around anything besides safety. The whole point of the fire code is to keep humans safe. So if what you're doing is going against fire code, then you are intentionally putting people in danger. And that's where we're at in the US. We're at the place where the fire code is being disrespected and the people who are responsible for keeping other people safe are being locked out. And, you know, I'm not okay with that. Y'all ain't whimsy enough, homies. And I don't like that, because there's no whimsy in locking the firefighters out of your facility. There's no whimsy in locking health inspectors out of your facility. If you have to lock doctors and firefighters out of your facility because of what you're doing inside, then you are not whimsical enough for me, homie. And I just don't understand it. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's purposefully doing evil. They're purposefully doing evil. You can't construe child concentration camps as anything besides evil. You cannot construe a child concentration camp as being legal, ethical, and necessary. It's entirely unnecessary. There are zero ethical child concentration camps. There's zero ethical concentration camps at all. So why does the US maintain concentration camps? Because we're immoral. If we were moral as a nation, if we had a North Star
of morality as a country, we would not allow concentration camps to exist. The reason we have concentration camps is because as a country, we lack the morality to stop them. We lack the common decency to stop child concentration camps, and that's why they exist. If we had human dignity in our hearts, we would stop them from existing. But we lack the ability to discern right from wrong to such an extent that not only do we have child concentration camps, but we have babies being born inside of child concentration camps to children. Children are being forced into pregnancy inside of concentration camps. I don't know how I even had to utter that sentence. But there are no legal child pregnancies. Every child pregnancy is a result of a criminal act. Every child pregnancy is a result of non-consensual intercourse. Children do not have the mental capacity or the ability to discern right from wrong at that level. They are underdeveloped to make those types of lifelong, complex decisions. That's why we don't allow them to make that choice. But under Trump's America, prison guards are forcing themselves onto children in concentration camps. That's why I say superheroes would stop us. If there was such a thing as superheroes in the world, they would go against the United States. You cannot be the good guys and maintain a child concentration camp. If your country maintains a child concentration camp, they are the bad guys. Good guys do not maintain concentration camps. Concentration camps are maintained by the bad guys. You can't ever justify a concentration camp. They're never moral, they're never legal, and they're never just. Every concentration camp is aberrant and a crime against humanity. And yet, they're expanding them. They're creating more of them, and they have them in secret, where they won't even disclose where the concentration camps are. So we have black sites inside of the US where for-profit prisons are making revenue for their shareholders by detaining children inside of SA cages where they're having intercourse forced on them. So, I'm pretty indignant right now. I'm pretty upset. I don't have a lot of reason to remain calm or try and speak with a gentle voice or maintain my decorum. I'm outraged. I don't understand how more people aren't outraged. But I'm also pretty powerless. I don't have a lot of wealth and influence. I don't have a lot of ability to make change. The most that I can do is say something about it. But it's also the least I could do. The least I could do is say something about it. I have people who depend on me to try and stay safe. I have pets, I have friends and family that depend on me to stay safe. So I can't really put myself in a situation that might result in my arrest because there are people who will suffer if I don't maintain my liberty. So for the most part, all I can do is talk about it. All I can do is speak out against what I think is wrong. But at least I could do that. That's the very least. At least I could say this isn't okay. So this channel, my channel, a lot of it is just about saying things are messed up. We should be doing better. There's a lot that's wrong, and we can't just act like it's okay. And, if you appreciate that, then you might like to follow, turn on notifications, subscribe, send a heart me. I do have links. So if you're looking at my profile at the top, I have a link tree. I do have other social media presence. So if you're interested in my content, you can find me on other platforms. With all that said, I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you have a good rest of your day out there, and I'll talk with you again very soon.